Hi and welcome to today's video. If you happen to like this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done already, because this will help me out in growing the channel and being able to produce more videos like this one. This episode will guide you through the issues of Uncanny X-Men published in 1982. Issue 161. Professor Charles Xavier is not well at all. On the outside he looks calm, catatonic, but in the inside of his mind he's in terror, in pain, in distress. He's faced death before, but this is far worse than he's ever experienced. Somehow an alien consciousness has become part of him. His thoughts, his mind, his very soul are no longer his. Second by second, this other entity is stripping him of his humanity, and no matter how hard he tries, Charles is not able to put a stop to this. The X-Men, along with Moira, Corsair and Sikorsky, are by his bedside. Results of the experiments indicate that Xavier is fighting so hard on the insides that his body's resources are being drained, and if it's not changing anytime soon, which it doesn't seem to be doing, he will die. Moira tells Cyclops about the suicide attempt Charles performed while he wasn't there. Scott seems shocked and annoyed by this. Kitty and Logan discuss about what's eating Scott, and Wolverine explains how Scott has gone through a similar situation with Jean Grey the Phoenix. Logan says he understands Scott because they both feel deeply and hide their feelings. He figures they're a lot alike. Corsair wants to approach Scott, being his father, but is strongly advised by Storm to not do so and let her do the talking. Her being his friend, she figures it's best to try and comfort Scott. Corsair complies. Aurora approaches Scott and they mention the nice looking sunset and Storm preference for this base over their old headquarters in New York as an opening for their conversation, which takes a quick turn for the worse. Scott pretty much blames Storm for the X-Men having to lay low on the island after their infiltration of the Pentagon, which did not go unnoticed by the press as Scott shows in a newspaper. He says it's Aurora's fault and a different solution to the privacy problem they were facing should have been considered. Storm responds by saying they needed to undertake action fast. Scott says that he should have been consulted, but Storm responds by saying she's the team leader, not him. Scott says that perhaps it's time he took his old job back, to which Storm responds by saying, all you need to do is ask for it back, if you really want to reclaim that position. She walks off annoyed. Scott asks her to please stay and he says that he's sorry for lashing out. They talk about the negative stuff that seems to happen and that that's sometimes just the way life works. Scott's having a breakdown and he seems to lose everything he's ever cared for, namely the professor, just like he had lost Jean before. Scott asks Aurora to help him. Storm tries to be there for him like friends and teammates should. We then see the Majestrix of the Shi'ar Empire, Lilandra, giving Charles an embrace as if it is the last. Tears fall from her eyes and she says to her beloved one how they had such dreams and that she will not give up on them. She reminisces to how her thoughts reach out to him from across the universe when they first met, and she asks Charles to hear her thoughts now. And if he needs her strength, she will gladly give it, as long as he fights. Charles does not respond to her words, nor to her tear that drops on his cheek. In his mind, it's 20 years ago, in Haifa, Israel, where he meets up with Daniel Shomron, apparently an old friend of Charles. Daniel asks how his trip to Cairo went, and Charles responds by saying it had its memorable moments. Charles had a confrontation with the psychic entity called the Shadow King there, as well as a run-in with a young girl who would later become Storm. They catch up, and Daniel says that he's sorry to have heard that Charles and Moira recently broke up. Charles asks how Daniel has been doing, and he responds by saying that he's still a psychiatrist, but now Holocaust survivors instead of battlefield casualties. And he remembers how well Charles worked with some of the most severe cases back then, how Charles was the best psychologist he had ever seen, and how he has needs for Charles' unique talents. They drive to Daniel's hospital and introduces Charles to one of the volunteers working there, a man named Magnus. Magnus tells Charles that he has quite the reputation, due to Daniel's opinion of Charles. Charles notices that Magnus' mind is closed off to Charles' mental powers, and wonders if Magnus is also a mutant, just like Charles. He sees a number tattooed on Magnus' arms, and Magnus confirms that he was a prisoner in Auschwitz, and how he grew up there. Charles informs about his family, and Magnus responds by saying that he has none anymore. Dr. Shomron says that most of the volunteers have been in camps, one way or another, and that they bring a degree of empathy that can be matched without that kind of experience. He then introduces him to Gabrielle Haller, who had been so traumatized in the camp in Dachau that she withdrew into a catatonic schizophrenia, totally retreated from reality. She came in the hospital in that state and has shown no signs of improvement. They've tried every means of trying to get her out of her trance, apart from the ones that involve physical pains, since she has already endured enough of that. Charles Xavier is Daniel's last resort. Charles says that he can't promise anything, but he'll give us his best shot. He takes a seat in front of Gabrielle, facing her, and unbeknownst to the two men watching, he reaches out with his mind and gently slips into hers. At first he encounters no resistance. He's enveloped in darkness and silence, a barren and desolate surrounding. No awareness whatsoever. He moves deeper into her mind until he hits a wall. Creatures come out of the wall and attack Charles. He figures Gabrielle must have noticed Charles' presence, and the monsters are constructs to keep the protective wall intact. This is a sign for Charles that her mind is still functioning. Charles is cautious, because if these monsters would kill him in her mind, he would die in the corporeal world as well. He notices her will is strong and that she's putting up a good fight. Charles then ends up in an ethical dilemma, namely, if she has found peace within herself this way, does he have the right to force her to confront her past and her present? He concludes he does, because life in itself is the greatest of gifts and should not be wasted. Gabrielle must be allowed a full chance to live, to grow, to be all that she can possibly be, despite the horrors that she had to endure. He focuses as a horde of creatures emerge from the wall, but he ignores them, giving the full focus of his telepathic powers on breaking the wall. It starts to crack, light shines through the fissures, and the wall shatters, making way for a glowing bright light. He then experiences the pass through Gabrielle's eyes. How she stands in a cramped, packed tightly cattle car, so tight that people suffer and die, but they don't even fall on the floor. They remain on their feet. Her grandmother dies that way, by her side. Once in the camp, the lucky ones are immediately gassed and their remains cremated. But Gabrielle is beautiful and the guards like her. She survives, but is no longer innocent because of everything she's endured and seen. She starts to wonder if it's her fault to have experienced this kind of horror. If she was wicked or evil and deserves this kind of punishment. She thinks of committing suicide, but lacks the guts to follow it through. She prays for the guards to grow tired of abusing her and that they will send her to the gas chambers, but it never happens. And in the last days of the war, she's dragged in front of the commandant and he points a magic wand at her, chants an obscene spell and Gabrielle is transformed into gold, a metaphor of course. Then, in the physical world, she suddenly screams out at her mama and papa. Magnus and Daniel are amazed at Gabrielle regaining full consciousness. They lay her down in a bed for recovery, and Charles says that she's far from fully recovered. The three of them take place in Daniel's office and share drinks to celebrate this progress that Charles has made today with Gabrielle. They talk about what Charles experienced in Gabrielle's mind, and how Gabrielle expressed remarkable verbal images of what Charles saw in her mind. While they do so, there's a person outside of the window of Daniel's office eavesdropping on their conversation. That person is surprised at the Haller girl being conscious and thinks about how the leader has to be informed, since they've been waiting for this moment for years. The person ends his thoughts with "Seek Heil." In the coming weeks, Gabrielle is starting to come to grips with her new situation, the contrast between child and adulthood, and her old life in Holland as opposed to her new one in Israel. She has the aid of her new two companions, Xavier and Magnus. During their travels, Xavier discovers a kinder spirit in Magnus, yet also very different, especially concerning Charles' idea of human evolutionary mutation. Magnus takes a bit more extreme stance in this theory. Xavier realizes this is most likely due to Magnus' deep scars resulting from the experiences during the war. Gabrielle starts to develop feelings for Charles, and Charles, being a telepath, notices this. Somewhat reluctantly, he gives in to Gabrielle's flirtations and they share a kiss. Charles pretty much knows that Gabrielle thinks she's in love with him, but he knows for quite certain that she is not. Charles thinks to himself, if it makes them both happy and gives them solace they both seek, why not? While they share the kiss, the hospital suddenly gets attacked. The attackers make their intentions quite clear, namely seize the Haller woman, alive and unharmed. A battle ensues between the attackers and the Israeli troops. One of them expresses the hope that they're not Arab commandos or terrorists. Another one of them responds by saying they are not, they're speaking German. The Israelis are outnumbered and Charles tries to leave Gabrielle, who is panicking in fear of yet another war, in a safe spot behind the jeep, while he plans to use his psi powers to turn the tide in the battle that's going on. At that moment, he gets shot. Gabrielle gets abducted and dragged aboard one of the assault crafts, which leaves the area, while the attackers enter the other one. The second craft is about to take off, but it suddenly gets torn apart into little pieces. Metal shrapnel sprays forth and slaying almost all of the attackers, yet none of the Israeli guards or patients of the hospital. The hospital itself doesn't get damaged either. Charles can still hear the death screams of the attackers in his mind, while he gets up from being shot. He sees Magnus on the rooftop of the hospital with some kind of energy surrounding him. The same kind of energy that was surrounding the assault craft, right before it exploded. When Magnus comes rushing downstairs, he's worried about Charles, who seems hurt. Xavier says his head still hurts, and he asks Magnus if it was necessary to slaughter the attackers. Magnus responds by saying that they would have done no different to them. He asks Charles if he did not kill in Korea without mercy or hesitation while in the army. Those memories still sicken Charles. Dr. Shamran comes running towards them, telling them they have a prisoner who will not identify himself or the attackers, nor say where they took Gabrielle. The prisoner claims he speaks no English. Charles says that won't be a problem, and he enters the prisoner's mind to get the information he needs. He finds out the prisoner is a former Waffen-SS major and now squad leader for something called the Hydra Bruderschaft. 2 days later, we see a military encampment of mostly German men, the former cream of Hitler's dreaded Schutzstaffel. But at this moment in time, they have a new leader, a new insignia, and a new cause they follow. This organization is not yet known to the world, but will soon be known as the most ruthless and vicious criminal terrorist cartel in history, Hydra. A trooper comes rushing down the slope, yelling they found something. He informs Herr Baron that the directions they had gotten from the woman were perfect. The Baron reprimands the soldier for being so loud and vocal about their findings, forgives his enthusiasm, but also warns him to not transgress like this again. The Baron then thanks and insults Gabrielle and tells the troopers to bring her along because she should witness the moment of triumph. We see Charles and Magnus wearing stolen Hydra uniforms, and Charles recognizes the Baron as Baron Strucker, one of the most wanted Nazi war criminals. An upset Charles can sense the things Strucker did to Gabrielle, how he tortured her to get the wanted information from her. Magnus tells him to calm down, or they will get found out and not be able to help Gabrielle, nor bring Strucker to justice, if Charles keeps acting like a lovesick schoolboy. Charles and Magnus follow Strucker and his troops inside a cave. Strucker tells the story of how the Führer's personal gold reserves were shipped out of Germany in the final days of the war and hidden deep in Africa, laying there to be used one time in the future to finance the resurgence of the Nazi Party and eventually a Fourth Reich. And now Gabrielle was turned into a living map to this vault by psychic conditioning. That process, however, drove Gabrielle insane and the secrets were lost forever. Charles and Magnus make their plan to rescue Gabrielle, while the troops move outside the cave and trigger the explosives to break down the wall that hides the gold. Strucker then goes back inside and tells everyone present how this treasure will enable Hydra to conquer the nations they see as their enemies. Where Hitler failed, Hydra shall succeed. Hail Hydra! At this moment, Charles and Magnus make their move. Gabrielle thinks it's a trick and that they will hurt her, telling them to let her go. Magnus tells Charles to use his psi powers to make Gabrielle shut up, and Charles is surprised that Magnus apparently knew about these powers. The troopers notice the intruders and start attacking them with gunfire. Magnus deals with the metal objects, like he did the assault craft before. Charles takes Gabrielle, who ends up in a state of shock, as he uses his powers to visually hide the two of them from the minds of the troopers. He uses his powers further to ignite a fight between troopers, and within minutes everyone is fighting one another. Magnus compliments Xavier on his strategy, but Charles takes no pride in it. Magnus comments on how that mindset will someday cost him dearly. Magnus asks how Gabrielle is doing, and Charles tells him she has withdrawn again. He also explains how he's reluctant to microbe her again, in fear of her becoming too dependent on the way of resolving matters, how she needs to develop a psychic resilience to cope with the stresses that life brings. They then get attacked by Strucker, wearing some kind of gauntlet nicknamed Satan Claw, a powerful weapon able to shatter boulders with a single punch. While Xavier tries to protect Gabrielle, Magnus goes head-to-head with Strucker. Strucker attacks Magnus with the gauntlet, but Magnus tells Strucker he won't be able to slay Magnus as easily as his family was at Auschwitz. With the gauntlet being made of metal, Magnus is able to distort the weapon around Strucker's hand, crushing it. Magnus says he regrets that his powers only started manifesting when the war was already over, or he would have stopped the tyranny. Strucker responds by saying that Magnus might have destroyed Deutschland and will now maybe destroy him himself, but that the ideals and their great purpose will prevail. Magnus says he doesn't care for the path humanity chooses to take. He knows that once Homo sapiens has destroyed itself, Homo superior will take its rightful place. He blasts away through the top of the cave they're in and uses his powers to lift Xavier and Gabrielle outside, along with the gold and himself. Strucker says he will pay for this and how he will hunt Magnus down. Magnus leaves and the cave collapses in on Strucker. Outside, Magnus asks how Gabrielle's doing and Xavier is not so sure, even though he has established contact. Xavier and Magnus exchange some words. Xavier asks what Magnus will do with all the gold, and Magnus tells Xavier that he's way too naive, and how he's learned that those who love you will turn from you in horror once they found out what you truly are. He also says that if it's up to him, mutants will not go to the gas chambers that easily, and that they will fight and win. Gabrielle wakes up while Magnus leaves with all the gold. She remembers everything, yet as if it was all a dream. How she was locked up behind a wall, safe, but heard Charles's voice, followed it, and is now happy to be back alive again. We see Xavier waking up from his own comatose state, saying how he was lost, deep within his mind, with a hideous monster trying to devour him, running deeper and deeper within himself, trying to escape from them, but he couldn't. He heard Lilandra's voice, calling him back, giving him hope, giving him strength to survive and triumph. Lilandra responds by saying she only did what any other would have done for the ones they loved. The X-Men are of course happy with the recovery of Charles, yet still worried about Illyana and what had happened to her. Lilandra has to leave again because her duty as the Magistrix of the Shi'ar Empire calls. A farewell banquet is arranged and they all join in, apart from Moira, who stays home with Charles and Illyana. The team gets dropped off aboard Lilandra's vessel by the Starjammers, who will not join in the festivities. Corsa says they respect Lilandra, but they have no love nor trust for the Shi'ar as a whole. As Lilandra is about to bring her speech, and Wolverine notices familiar scents that put him on edge, Lilandra stutters in mid-sentence, and ends up in the same kind of catatonic state Professor Xavier was in before. The X-Men make plans to go back to Earth, hoping the Professor will be able to help, and at that moment, Deathbird makes her entrance. A coup d'etat once again. The X-Men charge at her, but she seems to be behind some kind of energy field. A bomb goes off, which was hidden underneath her table. When the dust settles, the X-Men are unconscious on the floor, with Deathbird and the BROOD standing over them, with the BROOD saying how the renegade Deathbird served them well, as will the X-Men, as hosts for the spawn of their blessed mother of us all. Thanks for watching this video.